Thank you all of you once again. So the day is finally here. I've been cooking up questions to ask these two gentlemen for like 2 months now. And I've done a very poor job of it because I really don't know what to ask them. Because I know most of the answers already, having been here for about 11 and a half years now. So what I thought was, I'll ask some questions which I still feel are the most profound reasons of why most of us are here at Zoho. We'll keep it around that. And the second thing is, we'll bring up some insights from Tony, who I'm happy that he's here today. His first Zoholics in India. He's come all the way from the US. And we thought we'll use this opportunity to have a conversation and more importantly, give you the opportunity to ask them questions. So let's keep it that way. It's going to be a freewheeling conversation. There's no rehearsal. They don't know what I'm going to ask them. The first thing I would say is, I joined Zoho back in 2012, and I only met Tony, I think, 5 or 6 years later. I had never even seen him. And I used to wonder, who's this mysterious co-founder who we never meet? What does he look like? Funny thing, even for this session, look at Sridhar's picture and Tony's picture. I asked him for a photo. That's the only photo he had somewhere from, I wanted a high-definition photo of his. He didn't have any to give me. So I was like, who is this mysterious co-founder who we don't know of, who we don't hear often? And I met him 5 years later, and it didn't take me too long to realize, why does Sridhar call him his Buddha? I would want Sridhar to talk about that for a second before we start the questions. What did you think of Tony when you first met him? How did it all start? What made you think that he's the guy you want to work with or start a company with?
Actually, Tony is maybe the calmest person I've ever met. I've actually, in all my, 30 years now, I don't think I've ever seen him get angry even once, lose his cool, anything even once, all these 30 years. And of course, I get angry and all that, and Tony is like the Mr. Ice Cool. And he's also, of course, those of you may not know this, he wrote the first product by himself, first code, and which started making us some money, and then kind of we bootstrapped ourselves from there. And he sat at home and wrote the code. So this was back in 1995, right? 96 early. So that's how it all got started, and I signed up as his VP of marketing, with the same thing as Praval is doing now. And one thing I would see, I am an engineer, right? I write code too, but I figured out very quickly, between the two of us, Tony absolutely cannot sell. I at least know that I cannot sell. Right, Tony? So we go for customer meetings, I'll tell him, Tony, please don't open your mouth because then you'll just joke. Anyway, so that's how it all got started. Because I knew I can't sell, but because I knew that, I tried to make up for it. And Tony was very happy that he couldn't sell. So that's how it was. But anyway, he is, he's my Buddha, as I've always said, the source for calm, peace, the peace within, right? That comes from Tony here in our company. He's our pacemaker across the company. And he's now doing more and more of it because we have, 300 teams to manage. And so all of the peacekeeping operations Tony does. And our company knows very well that whenever there is any dispute between two teams, I'll be the first person to vanish from the room. So Tony will be called in to do all that. So anyway, over to you, Tony. Now, more.
So Tony, I'll flip the question to you now. Sridhar found his Buddha in you. What did you find in him when you first met? And I'm pretty sure it must have been challenging. And I'm surprised you still have your hair on. I've only worked with him for 10 years. You've been here for like 27 years probably. What did you find in him?
Yeah, most of you know by now, Sridhar is a very unusual person. So a lot of stories from the early days, so I won't bore you with all of them. But the first time we met in person, mostly it was transactional before that. We would talk about business, but first time I met him and went to a coffee shop, and I was very focused on getting the product out and so on. Sridhar wanted in one conversation to talk about 100 different things, from, he'll talk about the Chinese Cultural Revolution to what have you, right? All in one conversation. And, it was something, how can we think about all these things if you're trying to get the product out? It's only much later I realized how valuable, because first and foremost, Sridhar is a philosopher, if nothing else. More than a technologist, he's a philosopher. So he really thinks through things at a very deep level and puts things together in a solid theory. Whether right or wrong, it's always a solid theory. And over time, initially people are skeptical of his ideas, even within our team, even today. A lot of the leaders will be saying, what is Sridhar talking about? But over time, we may argue with him, but the universe somehow conspires to prove him right. Over time, he somehow turns out to be right. So more often than not. So, but in that early stage, it was something where I kept thinking, how are we going to get the product out with this many things we're going to talk about? So that was my first impression.
Sure, thank you. Switching gears a bit, as two businessmen, co-founders, if you were to go back in time, and you could change one thing that you would have done, what would that be? I would hear Tony first, and then Sridhar, you can. If you had to change one thing going back, don't tell me the co-founder.
Yeah, if I had to change one thing going back, I mean, there's not one thing, there's probably 100 different things I would change going back. But I think back to, I was definitely responsible for engineering more than anything else. So I think about that more than other things. And I think if I think back to the way we develop products and the way we build teams, I think I would have spent more time on getting people to communicate more. See, right now, Sridhar's a great communicator, and he makes up for the rest of us, myself included. Most of our leadership and people are happier writing code than writing, communications. So that's probably an area I would have invested more in early on, to set a culture of people writing more, communicating more. But there are 100 different things we could have done.
I probably would have gone rural sooner, much sooner. That's what I would have done.
Talking about business, sure, we could have changed a lot of things, as you said. But let's hear about the early days of, I'll flip it this way. It's a lot easier for us to say that we don't measure, we don't acquire, we groom, we nurture talent. All of that, for us to say it at the 10th year of Zoholics on a grand stage is a lot easier than it was 10, 15 years ago. What was that conviction with which you both started with, apart from the early members that worked along with you? What was that conviction that made you feel that this is the right path? This is how we're going to achieve it. What was that calling from within? When a company, in fact, there was no Zoho. We started off as something very different and then got named into AdventNet, which was the name of the company for a really long time before Zoho and Zoho Corporation happened. So back in the day, what was that strong conviction that made you believe that we'll get there, we'll make it big, or at least we'll put food on the table, as Sridhar calls it? What was that feeling? What was that conviction all about?
Yeah, so I think at the start, speaking for myself, and I think Sridhar was at least partly in that boat, we were, technology people that enjoyed building things. So the early insight for us was realizing that, there's almost nothing you cannot do. That was almost a light bulb moment for me when you build something. You know, before that, there was this perception, this mysterious products that are magic. But at some point, the realization strikes that almost anything you want to do, you can do. You know, there was a video of Steve Jobs talking about this, about remaking the world the way you want it to be. So it's a bit irrational, I have to say, in that conviction that you have. But at some level, you have to believe that you can really change things. And it stems a little bit from wanting to do it, of course, building things, building technology. But that was an early thought, I remember.
Early on, I actually was studying Japan. Right? I probably spent a year reading about Japan. I had not visited yet, actually. I visited only much later. Then I spent I read all of the books of, all of the speeches of Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore. Every word he uttered, I think I've read. So, like all of the collected works. I bought it when I was coming to Chennai from San Francisco. You stop in Singapore in those days. And Singapore, I'd go to the bookshop and I bought like the entire collected works. I read it, all of it. So these were before Zoho, before the company existed. It's probably 92, 93. So I asked myself, why couldn't we do a Japanese style company, a Honda or a Sony or a Toyota in India? Why didn't they happen? And you know, in those days and even now, right, Japanese brands are all over the world. I mean, in this very room, I'm sure there's like 5 Japanese brands we can spot. So why aren't there Indian brands everywhere, all over the world, right? So that was the thought, and so I had to understand Japan. It was a slow process for me to understand what made the Japanese companies work, how do they work. And then I also, of course, I was in Silicon Valley. We were in Silicon Valley at the time, and so I could slowly understand, compare and contrast models. What is different about Japan? What is different in the US? I talked about the whole topsoil erosion, all that, right? So I realized why Silicon Valley is unique. It is unique not in the way that people think it is unique. It is unique in the way that it can actually get the topsoil from anywhere in the world. But almost no other place can actually assume that. Because when there is actually one place like that, then other places cannot assume that, because that place will take the topsoil from the other place. Even in the US, that happens. Boston area lost talent to Silicon Valley. The Dallas area lost talent to Silicon Valley. It happens all the time. In US, somebody else will want to become Silicon Valley and they won't, because the actual Silicon Valley will steal the talent. So, but Japan exists, Taiwan exists, all that. So how do they do it, right? So I kind of internalized those lessons well. And I spent several years on this. And before the company existed, before I knew there would be a company, right? So that was like and then you know, once you get started, you know that you are, I realized even as of 95, 96, the rest of my life I'm going to spend on this. There's nothing else. So then you know, if you're going to make up your mind on it, then that's it. So.
Speaking of that, now that we have customers, partners that across 150 plus countries globally, which of the markets do you think were the toughest to get into? As a company born out of India, made in India, made for the world, sitting right here down south in India, with a much smaller team back then. As they say, getting the last 10, 15, 20 countries would have been a lot easier than getting the first few. So which was the most toughest market as an outsider to get into? What do you think about that? Which country comes to your mind?
Japan would be the most difficult customers to win because they are so perfectionist. And you know, everything has to be absolutely perfect to be able to sell in Japan. And fortunately, we had some early Japanese customers, so that was helpful to learn that attitude, to learn that spirit. So, coincidentally, no, you would not realize, you may not know this, Microsoft had some early customers in Japan. And Bill Gates would say the same thing about what he learned in Japan. And curiously, Steve Jobs had spent some time studying Japan too. So you would, in fact, I would urge all of you, Japan is now a kind of a lot of faded version of itself because of the demographics. Population declining about almost 1 million people a year. So they're losing almost 1% every year now. So it's a lot faded version of what it was, but you still have, a lot of interesting that you have to study this. For us in India, the best country to study would be Japan. And I think that is where we made a mistake by actually learning the English language, because we ignored Asia, we ignored Japan. So in fact, that's the curse of English language on us. That's what I often say. If we had not got into English, we would have maybe studied Japan a lot more. As the Koreans did, as the Taiwanese did, as the Chinese did. They all studied Japan, by the way. So we should study Japan more.
Interestingly, how many of you know that we have an office and a team in Japan for the longest time? In fact, I remember there was an office, a team, very few of you. And this has been there longer than I've been at Zoho, so I've known of the Japan office colleagues there. And interestingly, correct me if I'm wrong, Sridhar, the first ever Zoholics that happened also happened in our Japan.
The word Zoholics was coined in Japan by our Japanese employee.
So the word Zoholics was coined by a colleague from our Japan office. All right, moving on. In India, a lot of people worship us as a SaaS, OG company, and all of that. And one question that often comes up in conversations at events, industry events, and people meet is, what is your SaaS playbook? And the word playbook is often used, abused. A lot of people want to, oh, is this a Zoho playbook? What is that? Sridhar's presentation this morning was kind of debunking that, the secret sauce. He kind of revealed that. But what's your take on the playbook? How do you take that word? Can we make a playbook of doing this over and over again? Do you think so?
Yeah, no, it comes down to people. At the end of the day, Sridhar, as I said, is a philosopher. And it's only later I realized how much his leadership has an impact, especially on young people, and how it motivates them. And through that, we have created leadership that has taken this forward. And not each of them, not all of them are the same. They're all different and they do things slightly differently. But they've all imbibed a certain culture, a certain vision, a certain, as well as learning from each other, of course, but a certain ambition to do this and conquer the world, which in some ways that's what Sridhar has given the team, the confidence that we can do this, and unwavering confidence in that way. And so that definitely motivates the team and the leadership. So it is not a playbook in that sense. It's about creating leadership that's able to execute in whatever way works for their product, market, country, and so on.
Yeah, again, the word playbook. I mean, I'm going to start with the word itself. That indicates some kind of a recipe, some kind of a formalized process right there. And you don't want to think playbook. I mean, I talked about Japan, right? Is there a Japanese playbook? No, there's a Japanese philosophy of business, maybe. So maybe there's a particular cultural attitude and long-term orientation and technology perfection, all of those. Then you wouldn't call it a playbook. In fact, the very kind of people who use the words like playbook don't go and create great companies ever. I assure you. So if some VC or somebody drops the word playbook, avoid him. Useless. So I'm telling you, seriously, I've met a lot of them, right, over the years. For 27 years, I've met them. And whenever somebody thinks there's a playbook, there's something, these are all like superficial nonsense we use, as though there is some formulaic thing that you can do in this. You can't. But there's something deeper. I mean, you can think about philosophy. And again, I often point this out, right? See, in India now, we are at The first generation of IT professionals have now, there is a second generation of IT professionals, right? A lot of the original IT professionals are parents whose children are now in fairly senior positions. But we still are talking about why we don't have Microsoft and Google and Apple and all here. We are not in 1985. We are in 2023. We're going to be in 2025. So, and similarly, I talked about, I was in NIT, REC, that is the former REC. NIT Trichy was formed in 1964, the same year as BHEL. In that year, if you asked a betting person, would India get ahead or would it be China, they would have said absolutely India. And they would have said India would be much ahead of a country like South Korea at that time. I'm talking about 1964. When we had NITs, we had the IITs, we had BHEL, we had a lot more infrastructure, all of that, compared to South Korea at that time. And it's this kind of playbook thinking that we imported that sometime that, you know, and this again, the same thing that happened in our technology industry. So if there's one message that I would like to take from this, you avoid that type of thinking itself somehow. You have to go, that's why go read about Japan. And don't read, in other words, don't spend a lot of time reading about the latest digital marketing technique right now. Go read instead and spend some time in philosophy because we have to get those right. We can get this detail right later, but you have to get the fundamental right, the orientation right, the true north right. That's what you have to get. So that's how I think about that.
Yeah, I remember one of the interviews I had back in the day, they asked me, what is the Zoho playbook? And it took me a while to figure out, even if I had to stitch one together, there's no way any of us can do that because as a company, we have thrived on serendipity. A lot of it happened purely, all the products that you see, it's not that 10 years ago I remember when I joined, we had about 14 or 15 products. Nobody really said we have to hit 55 or 60 or maybe 100 tomorrow. That was not the goal. So a lot of it was just serendipity, teams coming together, solving a problem, building on that. One last question before I think we should open up. There are a lot of people in the room. By the way, any guess on how many people in the room today? In just this room, not the other areas? 600, 1,000, 500? 1,200? Okay. So there's a bit of a situation that the team was trying to handle, and we had approximated about 1,300 people in total. That was our guess when we started planning and we found this venue, all of that. A quick tidbit on that. We got a call from the hotel that we have placed 1,500 chairs in this hall, and there are 100 plus people standing behind, 100 outside, and 100 upstairs. So it's a good problem to have. Right after this session, we're going to figure out to handle the logistics of it. My request there would be, please try and grab your lunch and come back so that we get back on track. It's slightly off time. There's a small request on that. But so yeah, we're approximately hitting about 1,700 people, it looks like, including 250 or 280 of us, my Zoho colleagues. Like I said, the biggest ever. Coming back to the last question, Sridhar and Tony, and it often comes up, we've been the world's only bootstrapped company to cross the $1 billion in revenue and all of that. Early days, when someone offers money, and it happens to a lot of us, including our customers, partners, how hard is it to resist that? If someone comes and gets you and makes an offer, either for acquisition or to invest in your company and all of that, how hard was it to say no to that, Tony?
Yeah, early on, I think the opportunity wasn't there. Nobody was willing to give us money, right? So it's not like we had the luxury of people offering us money. Fortunately, we don't know what we would have done if people came and gave us money. But we had to earn our money initially. A little later on, we got offered money. And by that time, we had developed some convictions about, crafting our own journey and so on. So it's important to make this point because these days there is a lot of what I would call the trappings of startups, meaning people celebrate investment, celebrate this and that, or how large a team you have. But in my mind, that is something that misleads a lot of people. It really comes down to the product and the customer, right? If you're building a good product and people want it, the money is often a proxy for what you really need, which is your customer to be willing to pay you to do this, right? If your customer is willing to pay you to do this, bringing in money, trying to look at scaling up quickly, is often detrimental because products take a long time to mature and develop. So you don't want to have investors on your back, wanting in 2 years to show this and do that. So in my mind, most companies would do better to say no, but it's hard, I understand that. And when we did get offered, at one time, the closest thing we came to is, a term sheet. And from that point on, we just said no. We said no then, and we never looked back.
Sridhar has a joke on term sheet. Let's hear that.
I'll start with TSMC again. There was an interview by Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC, the man who took this all the way. And he was asked, so what's the difference between TSMC and the way that a typical Western company would think? And he said, well, I don't worry about the rate of profit. I don't worry about profit growth rate. I only worry about that I absolutely make some money, meaning I make a profit. I get to invest it. In other words, he simply threw out the entirety of Wall Street approach, basically. He threw that out. Just this simple statement he said. Wall Street will measure you on your rate of profitability, your profit growth rate, all of that. Actually, in Zoho, we don't look at any of that. Our profit fluctuates. In fact, there was a year, because our numbers now, because we are very much an Indian company, and we file it to the Indian government, and you can get those numbers with a lag, maybe about a year lag or something. So once a journalist asked me, we got your report and your profit had fallen 50%. I said, was it? I wasn't aware, I told her. I wasn't aware. And we were making money, right? Yes, that's all I cared about. We were making money, we were not losing money. 50% drop did not matter. Then she asked, how can you be so this thing? I said, well, we built some data centers, we accelerated some build-outs, all that. That's probably why. We had the money, we spent it. We didn't care that the reported profit will drop. So this is exactly the attitude in a TSMC. This would be exactly the attitude in Japan, by the way. In other words, see, we are not going to ever match Silicon Valley, beat Silicon Valley by borrowing all of the bad ideas from them. I'm assuring you this. We cannot, we will not. So we have to think different. And you notice this, I said Silicon Valley steals the people immediately, right? Topsoil erosion. Japan did not have topsoil erosion, South Korea did not, Taiwan did not, and China did not. We suffer from that. Why? So, in other words, you have to focus on, and this is related to how am I going to keep talent in Tenkasi. And next, actually, Tony and I are hatching a thing in Kottarakara, in Kerala. So we visited there and we are starting there. And the key challenge there, as the Kerala government well recognizes, how are we going to keep Keralites at home? Because Kerala is the most famous for talent leaving. And so I said, well, I said this, that's the only challenge you have to overcome because Kerala has supreme amount of talent. But they will all be in Bangalore, they'll be in Chennai, they'll be in Dubai, they'll be in somewhere else, but they're not in Kerala. And then they make some money, they go build a nice house in Kerala. That's about it, right? So, no, Kerala is a very beautiful state, very beautiful houses, except that the young people are missing. So we are going to try to change it, right? I want to change it a little bit. So that's why we are going to be in Kottarakara. We are going to try to keep the talent there by creating very challenging projects and keeping people at home. But that again requires a long-term mindset. And now come to the money part. I noticed early on the entirety of ecosystem of money, the VCs, everybody, they don't seem to be aware of Japan at all. The points I'm talking about, how a TSMC would think. No VC in Silicon Valley that I know would think like that. How do I know? Well, he talked about the term sheet. The one time we got the term sheet, very fortunately, very rarely for me, I never do this. That time, I don't know what instinct came over me. I read it actually fully. Nobody reads this thing, right? I actually read what they call the fine print. And then it said, I realized in the fine print that we are agreeing to a exit or liquidity in 8 years. Like you have to provide an exit or liquidity to your investor in 8 years. And actually, they were giving a fantastic valuation at that time. I remember something like $10 million, and they were going to give us a valuation of $200 million on $10 million revenue. So, but I'm reading the fine print, and we are agreeing to an exit or liquidity in 8 years. And then I told the investor, well, I don't agree with this. He was dumbfounded. He said, you don't agree with that? And you are challenging that. Normally, people will negotiate valuation, this or that. You are negotiating this? I said, yeah, I don't like this. I am wedded to this company forever. If you are not, then don't invest. I told him. He said, no investor will agree to your term. I said, then I don't want an investor. I told him. He said, you are arrogant. No, I am not. This is what I like. If you don't want to invest on those terms, don't invest. So we parted on those terms, basically. I said, no, I'm not allowing you to invest with an exit or liquidity clause on this. He said, that's a standard, box standard clause. Everybody does it. Then I went and asked a couple of lawyers. They said, yes, it is a box standard clause. Nobody will negotiate that. Then I said, then I'm maybe the only person who will negotiate it, so I won't take the money. That was the last time we ever got a term sheet.
Maybe a fireside chat with him someday. But thank you all of you for being a lovely audience.
But you understand why I negotiated the term sheet? Because I intend to be in business forever. Like Warren Buffett says, you know what Warren Buffett says? His preferred holding period is forever. When he makes an investment, his preferred holding period is forever. So that's what I asked my investor.
Thank you, Sridhar. Let's open it up for questions.
Yes.
I see if the timer is correct, we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, we strictly have time for a couple of questions. Actually, one. But we can take two.
Let's take a little more.
Okay. We have the mic already passed to someone over there. Yes.
Yeah, good to. Hi, Sridhar and Peter. The question is about the serendipitous way of working, and how much does it lead to chaos? Like in hindsight, if you connect the dots backwards, of course it has been a major success, but I want to understand what ratio of your R&D succeeds and what leads to like shutdown of projects, etc.
I told you Tony is a peacekeeper. You should have got the idea why. There's a lot of chaos inside.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to recognize that inside the company, it's now a large company, so there's a lot of divisions, and some have to be much more planned. Yesterday we were talking about our books product with Prashant, and we were talking about what countries to go into, and we were discussing, you know, there's every country is different, so you have to do things differently. So you have to be planned about many things. So my point is that when you talk about R&D and, you know, more speculative things, there is a need to allow that creativity and chance to happen. But when it comes to further along the product life cycle, you have to be fairly planned and prioritized and so on. So, you know, I don't want you to just think of everything happens by accident. It's not quite that. There are many different modes of operating that each of the leaders take. But when it comes to R&D, definitely that has to be part of allowing chance things to happen. You know.
Thank you. I visited Tenkasi and it was amazing that now it is scaling in. The initial experiment is now scaling predictably. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Folks, I was only allowed one question. I have negotiated for 5 in total on a condition that it's going to be like a quick rapid fire questions. So quickly ask your question in a sentence. Let's get an answer and move to the next person.
Praval, I thought we agreed for 4. 5 it is?
Okay, 5.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have one here.
Hello. Hello. I'm Chetan Kapadia from Regal Infonet, Mumbai. I had a question, like, starting an organization is easier, but scaling up this organization to this level, it's really challenging. And you must have also faced such challenges in your early days. I just want to know what was both your, the founders, your personal habit and the business strategy that brought the Zoho at this level, keeping all the stakeholders happy, the customers, employees, and even the founders.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Sridhar, take it. One of you.
Sure. Yeah, in the early days, it's like I was saying, it's about the product and the customer. So, in many ways that, conviction of what we want to do. We had a shared conviction early on. So it's not like we didn't argue or debate or fight about things, but that shared conviction of building something, and keeping customers happy was really overcame a lot of the other issues. So to me, that's critical for every company, that they have a clear vision of serving the customer, building a great product. And once you have that, then of course you'll later on get into a lot of other challenges. But that, to me, is the genesis of most companies. People have to have that passion and conviction for that.
Thanks, Tony. There's a lady there raising hand. Can we get her the mic, please?
Yes.
Somebody had a question.
If you don't.
Can we?
Yeah, the lady right there. She's been raising her hand for a while. Yeah.
Hi, it was very pleasure to hear you guys. My question is, in often product-centric companies, that too who are easing services, the market has really gone huge. So for companies to survive, is cost competitive an only option? So like you have to be always very cost competitive?
At some level, you have to be cost competitive in any company, because if you price it way over your customers' budget, you can't sell. But Switzerland companies sell in India. Swiss companies, for example, sell advanced machinery in India, rice polishing machines in India. So their labor costs are maybe 50 times our costs. So I think that tells you, that example tells you, you have to have some differentiator, and clearly the Swiss companies have something to be able to sell in India. And we have to understand what it is that they have. So again, the next country I mentioned, I didn't mention enough of, is Switzerland. I studied Switzerland a lot. So that's another example.
Yeah, I would say value competitive, but something that I would love to chat offline with you later.
Thank you.
Can we have more questions? Maybe two more?
Here.
Yes, sir. We are the second generation in the business of construction chemical, and our founder is almost sharing the identical philosophy with you guys. He is believing in the development of a rural area and the manpower belonging to the rural part. So again, we are not as bigger as you guys. So I just want your advice how to attract the human resources from that particular local area who are seeking employment in the larger corporate groups and not seeking employment in organizations like us.
This actually goes back to how do you scale up too. And essentially you have to build up our own talent pool that scales it. So, and you have to retain the talent pool, you have to nurture it, that's all there is. So scaling up is about creating people, creating the talent, creating the capabilities for running things more and more, whether running products, running events, running data centers, running security, all of it. None of that existed 20 years ago in Zoho. None of that existed. And many of the same people who were there at that time have now become leaders in those areas. Like our first event was run only 10 years ago, 11 years ago. We didn't know how to run events 11 years ago. But now we run lots of events. And the same people, the leadership is the same that the first event started with. Now we run a lot of events. So that's how you scale up, that you have to let people scale up. You have to nurture the talent. The mistake often companies make is, now I'll scaled up, let me go get some new people. That's often happens, right? We think that's again the language of Silicon Valley or language of the VC. Let's go replace these people, now we need a new crew. They often use these words. The first crew did the first 3-year job, now the new crew will come and do this. I don't agree with that idea. So.
Can we take one last question? Somewhere from the far end, someone whom we cannot even see from here. Somebody in the back wants a question behind there.
We have already promised one to the gentleman here and then one from the last.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hi sir, I'm Suresh. I'm a founder of Machu Tattoos. I'm from Madurai. So I'm a huge fan of Sridhar sir. As you said, you have seen a lot of Japanese.
Closer, mic closer please.
Yeah sir. As you have mentioned, you have read about all the Japanese. So I have read about all your videos, interviews, everything sir. I'm a huge fan of you. So my question is here is, as Steve Jobs, everybody talks about the work culture. So when I'm seeing, I'm using a Zoho One and all other products of us. How you created our Zoho culture, sir? Because it's like, I would not say it's a Zoho family, I would say it's a Zoho army. The people who takes in charge and doing it, it's like mind-blowing. So I'm a person who is developing a business in the stage. I'm struggling to create that culture. And I would like to know about your point of view in the current marketing stage, like digital marketing. What's your point of view regarding that?
Can we stick to one question, please? The first question on
first
culture.
question. Yes, culture, that would be great.
Culture is something you have to organically, it evolves, right? You cannot go and consciously create it. That's something that evolves from underneath. And why I talked about Japan, see, if you come to, if you look at Tamil culture, Kannada culture, Telugu culture, and Malayali culture, all of these, particularly in the south, particularly down south, I'm most familiar with south here, ours is very similar to a Japan or South Korea or Taiwan, any of those. Not very similar to a Silicon Valley culture, California culture. It's not, okay? And yet, all along, all this while, we have been trying to mimic the wrong paradigm of thought. Basically, that's our problem. And you study Japan and you study South Korea, you realize how close, which is why, a lot of young people now these days watch, I'm told, South Korean stuff, on this thing, Netflix and all that. I had never heard of them before. But I can instantly understand why, because that connects well with us. That's it. There is a cultural connect here. And yet, when it comes to business, we just import the wrong paradigms. And this is, so you have to understand that. You have to understand what is the context in which you are operating. What are your people like? I'll give you an example. Ours is not a layoff culture in India. We are not a hire and fire culture. People actually want to stick to a company, you know that? And that's something that we forget, that when somebody wants a job, they actually want to stay in the job. It's not like they're going to switch around. Nobody comes in thinking, I'm going to switch around every year, every 2 years. But we end up not earning that trust and loyalty. So, and we borrowed the layoff culture from wherever. And then we later get to complain that, we have a culture where nobody sticks around. So I think that's why I say, design your elements to the surrounding culture where we are, how we operate, then it'll work well.
Thank you, Sridhar. One last and final question from the gentleman over there. Sir, please keep your question precise. I request you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Akash from IHFC, IIT Delhi. Sridhar, Dr. Sridhar, Tony, pleasure to be here. And just wanted to acknowledge Zoho for what they are and what I envision for Zoho. Shine bright in the larger world and, as an example. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Sridhar. Tony, quick announcement before I leave. At 12 o'clock, we are opening the expo upstairs. It's a huge expo.